I guess I'm hitting the go live button. Okay, so today we're going to go over the knowledge check that's at the end of Unit 2. So those of you watching via the stream, or if you watch it later on, just go to Unit 2, pull it up. So again, even though lighting doesn't show it, you'll be able to pull it up and kind of follow up. And I'll try to be like, we're on number 7, we're on number 8. So you have access to this. If you have right now in the process, this is not the process to learn any of the content from scratch. This is fine-tuning verbiage so that you make sure that there's no confusion on things that you should already kind of have an idea about, right? So this is like in football practice, like a walkthrough, just to make sure we're all on the same page, right? I have not looked at these yet. This is from Miriam. So let us start. We analyze human motion. It's one of your commandments, absolutely, joint by joint, right? We don't want to, even though it's tempting, it's confusing to try to eat the apple in one bite. So we can talk about like, shooting a free throw involves a lot of different things. But if we're going to analyze the movement and joint positions of a free throw, we have to do it joint by joint. Okay? Absolutely. Rotational objects can rotate in blank directions about a given axis. 2. We can spin 2 different ways about any given axis. That's why we have flexion, extension, abduction. That's why we have these synonymous motions, 2 different ways of spin about each axis. Absolute reference is another name for global, right? A fixed, that's like absolute VO2, relative VO2. BMI is relative to body weight. Like relative means it's relative to yourself or to the person. And absolute means it's a global, non-changing fixed rate, fixed reference. Blank angles are angles created by the bones as references to ground and gravity. Yeah, I think that's that's a recall back, because I haven't looked at these yet. So I think that's a reference to global, because in our world, our only reference that we have, like if we, in the classroom, I've already established this is the front of class, the back, anterior, posterior, the side, like that. But again, if you go into the gym, where's the front of the gym? The park, where's the front of the park? I mean, so the only thing we really have universal in terms of most of our activities are the ground and gravity that we can reference our movement based off of. And relative angles are angles created by the actual bones that make up a joint. So in other words, we talk about illusions, and that's part of the illusions. Like if I asked you to just rotate your shoulder to try to get your forearm parallel with the ground, it's natural for people to want to move other things to try to accomplish that global reference of a segment. But the local reference is what's actually happening in the shoulder, what's actually happening in the trunk, what's actually happening in the things.
What's the relative reference?
Say, I'm sorry, I have fluid in my ear. Say it one more time.
Relative reference? I didn't hear what you said.
A relative, absolute. Local, and you have that verbiage in your unit notes or in your if you need to go reference it. The ankle has, so ankle plural. So the ankle joint has one axis, that can move in one plane, right? And has 2 possible motions. Now, this is a locally referenced question. I know that because it said the ankle has. It's like the ankle's ownership. Yes, the ankle can move in 3 global planes, but in terms of the ankle, the fact that it's, think of it like this, if the ankle could move in 6 planes, it would have, 3 planes, it would have 6 motions. Does that make sense? So plantar and dorsi are still plantar and dorsi, regardless of if the transverse, the roots transverse, the roots sagittal, each one, because it's always that ankle's sagittal. Three major bones that make up the ankle joint: tibia, fibula, and talus. Yeah. Talus is one of our dorsal bones. Remember, guys, that's important. My humble opinion, it's important to know. Remember, I said I'm not going to make you learn the incus, the stapes, the malleus, like little, but bones that make up these joints, I think, are very important, so that maybe you can see a little bit of X-ray vision inside to see what's happening and differentiate between the talus literally grooving inside that ankle mortise formed by the distal tibia and fibula, and what's underneath it formed by the subtalar, right? If you can see those things, I think it'd be easier for us to see what's happening with those things. Okay, what about number 9? Sagittal, good. Okay. What about 10? Dorsi, very good. And therefore 11, plantar, good. You know, there's going to probably be some question on the test about ankle extension. You know, that word doesn't, although it sounds like it should exist, it doesn't exist. And I tried several times to explain why, because we have 2 different forms of getting into fetal. Okay. Notice that, I'm glad she included that. What plane does the subtalar joint mostly move in? Mostly frontal. Mostly frontal, because it's a gliding joint. You know, as I start off darn near all frontal, but as I keep inverting, it's going to start to kind of shift more and more and more sagittal. So it's mostly frontal. Okay, what type of joint classification is the subtalar and transverse dorsal joints? Correct. Gliding, right? Summation, they're all kind of moving about each other. Little bits add up to a lot, right? Little motions in several places can add up to a lot. I use the pocket change analogy, right? 1 day's worth of pocket change, probably not going to get you some, but if you add several days of pocket change, might get you a smoothie. All right, what do you think about 16? In the when you flex the knee and you, yes, ma'am. That's okay. Correct. But for it, those are kind of 2, let's say, separate questions. I like combining it because it helps remind us what gliding joints is. But don't think of it as like you have to say. Don't think of it as saying, in order for me to know who I am, I have to say my full name is Brian Jude Campbell. You know? So unique non-axial gliding joint, but non-axial just kind of reminds us about the planes and the axes and stuff. But the gliding joint is actually the name of the You're welcome. Oh, I skipped it. Yeah. Okay, bro. I did an event this weekend, and I said ABC, so it was a fundraiser. It's an auction. I said I put the A in something. It was rated G, so I didn't B in something, and the last one, I put the G in dyslexia, so, so thank y'all if I skip something in the mistakes, I misspelled with the word, something, so. Okay. Blank is the common reference. So I think that's in the unit where we talk about conation and supination, how it's a common reference for closed chain inversion and inversion. So I think for that one, that's just to see if you remember what that commonality is. Remember, you can have a cat, but some French people say you. It doesn't make it any less than a cat. Inversion, eversion, pronation, supination. In fact, most of the time the pronation and supination is going to be subtle when the foot inverts or everts, like we call it pes cavus, so like a high arch, or a pes planus, which is a low arch. So it's this subtle inversion and eversion when your foot is on the ground. In other words, it won't always look like this. So I think that's just straight from the notes to see if you remember external with lateral, internal, medial. I think that's where you just want.
So which one is which? I can't see you in the screen. Like, this one, like which one for nation?
That's your fault. Let's see if we can answer. Thank you for addressing that. I'll just mess with it. Let's see if we can pull up. Can anybody look in our units to see if that picture is there? Allison, what page is that? 28. Okay. Okay. So if you don't mind pulling that up, and then I'll still do it, but maybe with that reference and you see it?
I don't know where it is.
Okay.
I'm not putting it in.
You have unit 2 pulled up? Okay. And so what's before it? Thank you. Okay, so it's like it's spiritual.
Yeah, I see that part. I just want to see pronation.
It might have been the video. Thank you. Got to bring my boxing gloves this morning. Are we cool? Cool. Does that say enough? Or you want me to, you cool? So I try to use my palm because it's easier to see this than if I do this, because the motion is so subtle. So this would be like my right foot, this would be like the arch. Does that make sense? So like pronation or eversion would be like if I had a flat foot. It's so subtle, I don't know if you can even see it, but like I'm trying to do this. And then like for a high arch, I'm trying to do this. All right, where are we at, if you don't mind? 16. We're cool with transverse, the knee's transverse, okay. Now remember the knee, the tibia and the femur is also owned by the socket, the ilium and pubis at the pelvis. So when we say the knee's transverse plane, it can't be the femur's polar axis, because the femur's polar axis is going to go with hip, internal and external stage. So it's kind of like the tibia's polar axis that's running through the distal femur. So when we say the knee's transverse plane, the knee's transverse plane is this, not this, because this is hip. That kind of makes sense. Okay, what's the joint classification of the knee joint? Specific, good, good, good. On test number 1, it was like, before we got into the deets of the knee, we were like, just hinge, the hinge part of it, because it was fetal allergies. But now that we went into it in more detail, and you're accountable for the internal and external, it's a modified hinge. It can do different things when it's out of anatomical that other hinge joints do. Good.
I didn't hear what. Can you repeat the answer when someone over there says it? Because we have to missing like all the things. Like someone over there will answer the question, and they'll just say good. You won't repeat it loud enough for the rest of us to hear it, so I'm just missing things.
Do you know any of these?
Not well enough.
Sure. I'm gonna go get my glass of water, and I'll be right back.
Okay. I'll just be honest, I don't know what. He's out. Is anyone would like you?
All right. So I'm not going to do that anymore. That was done to help you. That Miriam did. You guys can hit her up if you have any questions. Exam on Wednesday. I'm going to let you guys leave the review. Any questions? Yes.
Okay, can you demonstrate that one position where like, it's like a pose and
Say that one more time.
that one position where you're posing like you're on one knee and then you shift to a particular side, can you iterate what is happening? Because I know one side is the rotation and the other side that direction.
Uh-huh.
And can you just, so the knee that's bending, if you were to
Look at me, you're doing well, but let's not use the word did. That's okay. Outstanding, right? Let's just get into that, right? Knowing me, I put on the test fitted as an option.
If you use flex and you were to shift to the left side, that would be horizontal abduction.
Okay, let's set the stage in position. So tell me, or try your best to describe what position your different joints are in. So is my hip, what's the position of my hip? What's the position of my knee? So tell me what position we're in for no other reason to make sure everybody's on the same page. We're going to practice verbiage. So is my right or my left hip, are they both in anatomical? Is one That's okay. And someone else could help. Do you want to share this?
That's fine.
Come on, this is good practice. This is great practice. And also this way I don't have to repeat everything.
So, I guess I have a couple of points.
That's okay. Outstanding. So what's the position of your left hip? Is it an anatomical? Wait, anybody can help.
Just not at this time.
Okay, flex. Your left hip is flexed. Does that make sense? Good. Good, good. What about your right hip?
My right hip is an anatomical.
Yeah, and your right knee?
My right knee is flexed.
Good. While we're here, what about your right ankle? Good, good. Getting it? Okay. Left knee, I'd say a little bit dorside based off of anatomical, but remember, I'm not going to ask like, all this stuff. Yeah. Okay. So we've established where we're at, where we started. Okay. From here, and the reason I want to make sure we see this because I don't want to use words like shift, because what does that mean unless we see it, right? I want to use our verbiage, motion, or pelvic girdle rotations, or stuff like that, and that's why we do it. We do it because layman's terms can mean a lot of different things to different people. Okay, so from here, how do you want your pelvis to rotate so that we can look at different?
So, I would want it to rotate.
Or let's be plain. So you want to do sag? I was just trying to narrow it down. Do you want to do sagittal? Do you want to do transverse? Or do you want to do frontal? Okay. So now that we narrowed that down to frontal, there's two different spins in the frontal. Do you want to go right lateral or do you want to go left lateral?
No, right.
Perfect. So we're going to go right lateral. Okay. I'm going to do it with you. Make sure we're all on the same page. Okay. So from here, we're going to do this. Okay. Now, when you do this, do you feel a stretch on the inside of your right leg? It's because your right leg abducted.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Now, your left leg, look, you and me, we got each other. Let's hold on so that I don't fall because I'm old. So what I want you to do is, I want you to notice how your left hip is not anatomical, right? So if your left hip rotated in the same plane as your pelvis, we would have rotation of our hip. So if we and what that's saying is that if I move the ball about the socket, internal and external rotation, it would make sense that if the socket moves about the ball, like in right lateral in this position, I would also have internal and external. So it's one of those, right? So we've narrowed it down. It's either internal or external rotation of my left hip. Does that make sense? So at least we got a 50-50 chance. Now, is it hard to see? Yes. But one of the clues that I showed you guys is that if I have external rotation, my pubis sees the inside of my lower leg. If I have internal rotation, I'm not going to see anything, right? My leg is more lateral to my pubis. So when I do this, wouldn't my pubis see the inside of my leg? Yeah. There you go. Good. You're very welcome. You see how we can walk down the path of clues? Look, I don't have it memorized. I don't. But I wanted to make sure we were doing the same thing so that once we narrowed it down, then we could look for the clues that are locally and figure it out. Good.
For question 20 and 21, it says for motion varies in the transverse plane from the viewers and all motion perspective. I know in the knowledge check, on the Unit 2 material.
Yeah, I'm past the knowledge check, so let's make our questions just general questions that I don't have to go reference a knowledge check to.
Okay, well, it says from the socket perspective, it says you want to frontal. And on the knowledge check, it says in the transverse plane from the socket perspective. So I'm just not understanding that.
No problem, no problem. It is confusing, and that's why I like us clarifying that. What I think the intent of that question is, in terms of understanding knowledge, is we've talked about it before, but this is not easy stuff sometimes, okay? If a ball and socket joint has the most motions possible, true? So like for my elbow and elbow knee is just not modeled. flexion and extension is always going to look the same, regardless of here. I'm never going to, outside of me dislocating my elbow, okay? When you get to these triaxial ball and sockets, some crazy things could happen with perspective. Meaning, if I say, hey, femur, get in the fetal, and you have flexion, and the femur's like, gotcha, no problem. The front of my thigh is facing you, right? But what if I start here, I externally rotate, and I say, hey, femur, do the exact same thing I just did 5 seconds ago. Is this flexion and extension? Okay, so you're starting to see that, ooh, ball and sockets, we have to have ownership of individual pieces, whether it's the ball or the socket, to make things kind of make sense. Flexion, extension, but this is not flexion and extension, right? So the long bone will not own the perspective of the general motions, the sagittal and the frontal, so that we can have this is abduction, regardless of if I'm internally rotated, anatomical, or externally rotated. The transverse plane, in terms of the internal and the external rotation, is going to be owned by the long bone, so that we can have internal, external, internal, external, internal, external, internal, external. From the long bone's perspective, now it doesn't matter that I'm in the pelvis's frontal, the pelvis's sagittal, right? So the long bone's perspective, that's why this is internal and external, because it's not about the socket. Internal, external, internal, external. So that's what that means. You are most welcome. Thank you for that question. That's really important to clarify. Y'all can just ask Miriam tonight if y'all have any other knowledge check questions, or email her or contact. This is her knowledge check. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Difference between the hip and pelvis as far as like if you're asking for motion. So the hip is the pubis ilioischium and the femur, whereas the pelvis,
Oh, I see what you're saying now. Keep going.
whereas the pelvis is the pubis ilioischium, the sacrum.
Let me try to clarify. It's a really great question. One of the things that makes the hips and the pelvis unique is that I can move the ball about the socket on my left side and the right ball socket vernacularly. But as soon as I move the socket about the left side, the right socket's got to go for it. Now, notice I didn't say you have to have joint motion, but the literal socket on the right side has to move. I emphasize this in class with the scapula, because I always like to do comparisons. My right and left scapula are totally independent of each other. So what happens if I were to take those things and merge them and fuse them? Well, if I try to shrug the left, the right's got to rotate down. If I try to rotate the left by going forward, the right would have to go back. Okay? So the hip joint proper, right or left, is femur, And then the socket is made up of fused synarthrotic articulations of the ilium, ischium, and the pupils. But the whole pelvis, the whole pelvic girdle, is everything that makes up the left side and the right side. So the left ilium, ischium, pubis, the right ilium, ischium, pubis, and the sacrum, because the ilium attaches to the sacrum of the sacroiliac. Right? So that's what's happening when I do this. Now, on the test, probably not going to be like, tell me everything that articulates the pelvis, but I think hip joint is super fair, right? Those muscles on the side of those bones that articulate that actual movable articulation.
So if you were to ask like, not ask, but like anterior pelvic rotation.
If I ask about anterior pelvic rotation,
Yeah, anterior pelvic rotation.
you said it right, I was just.
Okay, can be the same thing as, like hip flexion bilateral.
It doesn't happen.
It doesn't have to break.
If it happens because of the emotion.
Okay.
So, and the reason I said it doesn't have to be, because like if you're doing reverse crunches, you can have your hips in a cast and still have posterior and anterior pelvic girdle rotation about your trunk. Okay? When we're standing, the anterior and the posterior are gonna happen because of the hip stuff. But I don't wanna set that precedent of yes, every time. Because when we get to unit 3, all of a sudden it's like, wait, I thought you said every time, and there's these exceptions when you just do it because of the trunk motion. That makes sense? It's great. Good. I'm glad I did this. This is great, because this will give students that are just needing some specific questions on fine tuning the chance to get those questions answered. And we don't have to start from reading data cool dinosaur from that. But yeah,
Are the answers good, or leads in the emails?
I'm not, but somebody can ask Miriam, and she can answer. You know, sometimes I feel like all of this stuff is new. Like I'm kind of an old school teacher. Like I teach the stuff, and it's up to you. And I think sometimes adding all this extra stuff is overwhelming to me, because I got to cash the checks to other people, right? So what I want to do is I want to, since Miriam did this, I want her to handle the follow-up questions. Or if you guys have a question for the review that Sarah did on Friday, follow up with her for those kind of questions. And that way I'm not overrun by things they did. It's meant to help you, but I don't want to make it hurt me because I'm trying to answer things that they put out there. So I'm gonna keep it within me. I think that's best for my standpoint.
Just to make sure, trunk stuff in minute 3 will be on the test, there's not anything past the trunk, right?
Well,
Not the vertebrae.
Specifically, it'll be scenarios where the trunk is gonna bend and move. Correct. So even though honestly, I would want like basic trunk questions, because to me that would be super simple. I had to include, if you're standing and you go right lateral, how would the trunk bend back to keep your functional circle of reach your site? So it's specifically trunk position and motion that would correspond with pelvic girdle rotations because of the hips. You're very welcome. So it's like a yes and a no. It's going to be very specific types of questions that would correspond with the lower extremity rotating pelvis. first test stuff, typically in any class, you take your first test, you forget about it, and then you go on to the knowledge of the second test. So although I'm never going to ask you a specific question that was on the first test, concepts keep applying. Position, motion, verbiage, flexed, extended, flexion, extension, from anatomical to anatomical. So, just keep that in mind. That, I'll use the analogy of the staircase that we're building, we're climbing, but if you're on stair number 10, technically every step you took is a part of number 10. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It builds upon itself. So make sure you get that verbiage and do not assume. I think a few things we saw on Friday, right? Like if we communicate a start and a finish, right? Don't make the finish your start. Simple things that I feel sometimes students will miss, and it's careless, careless mistake. So let's replace careless with care more. And we'll care more about the little semantics, the little details that are important. I said this on one of the first days of class, that you have medical doctors that back in the day amputate right leg, stat, chop off the wrong leg because they tired, they exhausted, it's an emergency. Who's right? Who's left? Okay. Can't put that one back. You take it off, okay? And I know that's a much bigger extreme, but I like to use extremes to look at continuums. I love that we did the pelvic girdle example where we could kind of walk through the steps, right? And hopefully that you doing it was like, I see it so much better. I can't wait for that question. It's great.
And we're in, right transverse pelvic girdle.
Okay, I need a little bit more information. You're probably gonna give it to me.
Yeah.
Good.
We're going to left transverse pelvic girdle, correct? And it's like, I know from start to finish what it is, but I can't think of it.
Okay, well, I need a little bit more information. Am I standing on both feet?
Yes,
That's okay. You see, right, so like to clarify, like, I want to make sure that I'm not doing it about one leg or the left leg, or if I'm on both, or if I'm, okay, so I'm standing on both feet and I'm already rotated to the right. Is that correct? Okay, so let's talk about position, and feel free to do it. If anybody can feel free to do it if you want to kind of see what I'm saying here. So if we're right transverse rotated, and put feet on the ground, I know right away that my left hip's going to be externally rotated and my right hip's going to be internally rotated. And if you can't see it, let me know. Because even though my eyes can see you, I don't have eyes here that make sure you can see what's happening here, okay? So if I'm rotated here, my right hip is internally rotated and my left hip is externally rotated. True? So if I start here and I go back home, that means my right hip had to have external rotation and my left hip had to have internal rotation. And it'll look like this. Make sense? And so I would have right hip external 2 and I have left hip internal 2. If I started here and did this, I would have internal rotation from and external rotation from. Awesome. You are most welcome. Great question. Right side, how quiet is it? Okay.
In Captain Powell,
There we go. Right side.
the pelvic girdle is like the hip motion during Captain Powell.
What would be the hip motion? Okay. It depends if we're catting or cowing. So if we start in a position where we're anteriorly tilted or rotated, okay, my hips are already going to be flexed and my trunk is going to be extended. Hands stay on the ground, knees stay on the ground. When I posteriorly rotate, it's going to be trunk flexion. Does that make sense? Awesome. Catting and cowing. I don't know which one is which. I guess the cat would be.
Cats.
Oh, yeah, when they get all puffed up. Yeah. Cat.
For horizontal adduction, what's the point?
So how we communicate that is, we will say the pelvis's transverse plane for a couple of reasons. One is we know that the long bones will only hold on to internal and external rotation, right? So when I say the pelvis's transverse plane, that kind of makes sense because the pelvis owns frontal, the pelvis owns sagittal. But when I say the pelvis is transverse, it eliminates the internal and external rotation because only the femur owns its transverse plane. For the shoulders, I won't say pelvis because they're independent of each other, so I'll say like the trunk's transverse plane, if that makes sense. So you can replace pelvis with thorax. You could replace pelvis with trunk. The trunk's transverse, whatever word makes it work for you. But the point is that it's not the frontal of the socket, it's the transverse of the socket. If that makes sense. Because remember, it's a variation of AB and AD. The analogy I like best, it may not work for all of you, is the clock. That's on the wall, it's traditional ab and ad. But if I take that clock and lay it down, that arrow's still at 6 o'clock. And so I could still go away in towards 6 o'clock. But now that the clock is in the transverse plane of my thorax, that's where you get the variation of the traditional AB and AD abduction. And we have to call it different things, or at least we have to call it a variation of it because we're going to have different muscles pulling across than pulling straight down. And getting somewhere, I don't want to call this ab and both of these directions ad. If that makes sense. Because how do I know where you're at? One ad gets me back here to anatomical. The other ad gets me over here, flexed. So I have to have verbiage to differentiate between those two similar concepts, but in different planes of the socket. Great question. And guys, as always, you have, I don't know if anybody, sometimes I'll look at the views. Believe me, if I had to watch me, I wouldn't watch it either. But you have references to go back and, well, let me go watch that again. Let me go specifically, I'm not saying you have to watch it all. You know, I ain't got time for that. I'm sure you don't have time for that. But if there's like one particular thing that you're like, I'm not quite sure when you saw, or I missed that day, I'm not quite sure, just feel free to go back and rewatch. I had a student in 415 who was asking me questions. She was like, I was sick and I missed a couple of days and wanted some clarification. I was like, okay, that's cool. Have you watched the videos yet? And she was like, no, not yet. And I'm like, why don't you do that first? So that way the clarifications can make more sense, right? The reviews make more sense if you stay up with the information. The questions make more sense if you stay up for the information. If you wait until the night before to compress all this stuff, we're kind of wasting our time with some of the reviews because it's just, you know, it won't make sense. So I just want to remind you, all that stuff is accessible. I dated every video, so and I put like KNES 310, Unit 2, Unit 1, and I put the date of the class. And so any time you're like, I want to re-watch or learn this specific thing, it's all there.
All right, guys, y'all have that review tonight at 6 with Miriam and the crew. See you Wednesday.